Curtis Calhoun here with MMA News, and right now I am joined by the UFC Hall of Famer, PFL analyst, Randy Couture. How's it going, Randy?
Doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks again for the time. Really do appreciate it. Obviously, it's a big week for the PFL. You got the PFL Challenger Series kicking things off for the year this Friday night. How pumped are you to kind of see the next fighters getting ready to make a name for themselves and show out in the PFL cage?
Yeah, it's always fun. Fun for me to take a little bit different role and be a celebrity judge instead of a commentator, which is very cool. Interesting format. Obviously, we saw Carlos Leal and a couple of other fighters come out of the Challenger Series, go all the way through the regular season. You know, Carlos made it to the semifinals. We've had guys made it to the finals from the Challenger Series. So these guys are real legitimate talent and an opportunity for them to show what their skills are all about and who they are. So always fun. I think it's a great format to develop talent and bring new skills and new names into the PFL.
I was about to ask you about that because I feel like with guys like Carlos and Delano Taylor, guys that really went deep in the season, right? Do you feel like that kind of boosts the stock of the Challenger Series in terms of showing like, hey, if these guys can make it, you can too?
Absolutely. And we had a couple of females come through the Challenger Series as well that did very, very well. That gives credibility to the Challenger Series. We're not just bringing, young guys in there that don't have any ability. These folks have a lot of ability and the potential to make an impact in the regular season in the PFL.
And one thing that's really stuck out, especially to me about the Challenger Series, is that it's so hard to get that contract, right? You not only have to win, but you have to do it in an impressive fashion and an impressive panel. I mean, just kind of talk to me a little bit about, as a former fighter yourself, like what does this opportunity mean to young fighters coming up in the sport?
Well, I can imagine the nerves getting ready to go out and perform in an opportunity like that and wanting to put your best foot forward. I think you got to keep it simple. Just relax, smile, have confidence in your training plan and the work that you put in to go in for that competition, and then just go out and let it hang out. That's what the PFL is all about anyway. It's not about talking smack. It's not about publicity stunts or any of that other stuff. It's about going out there and scoring points and winning fights. And I think that most of them grasp that very, very well. They settle right in. And, like we've seen, we've had some great performances and great competitors come out of that Challenger Series.
Right before we know it, the regular season will be upon us. Obviously, we got PFL Europe coming up too, the PFL regular season as well. Kayla Harrison, obviously, this is the first time in a long time that she hasn't held a PFL title. I guess, what are your thoughts on what her next move should be? I mean, is it the super fight with Chris Cyborg? Should she, go for that immediate rematch with Larissa Pacheco? I guess if you were in her corner and part of her team, I guess, what would you think she should do next?
Well, I know she wants that match back with Larissa. She wants that rematch, and I think that will come in its own time. She's going to be back in the regular season. Who knows who that first matchup is going to be? Obviously, you're looking at a new weight class and doing away with 155, and all those gals are going to have to make 145, which we know she can do. She did with Invictus in the off year when everybody was locked down. She fought at 145 in Invictus. So I don't think the weight cut's going to be an issue for her. I'm sure she's dialing that in and preloading all of that, getting her weight in the right place for the long season that is the PFL. So that she can make weight easily going into those two fights in the regular season. Who she gets matched up against is the real question. I think at some point she'll get that Larissa Pacheco fight back. Maybe that'll be on a pay-per-view card. Who knows? So I don't know if Pacheco's ever made 145 or can she make 45. There's a question there, but she's a professional. This is what she does. This is where her passion is. I'm sure she's going to be fine.
Absolutely. One thing that's really stood out about the PFL too is adding so much top talent, right? I mean, you got Thiago Santos getting ready to debut this year, Aspen Ladd. You still got Julia Budd in there too. I mean, just kind of talk to me about, kind of PFL's place in terms of the MMA hierarchy. I mean, in terms of its growth the last couple of years.
Well, it's exploded. Obviously, I think moving to ESPN, doing on ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPN Plus has been a great vehicle for us. As gracious as we are to NBCSN, it wasn't a great fit. It was kind of a leftover contract from the World Series of Fighting days, and I think being in it's more NASCAR and golf than it is MMA, honestly. And so I think ESPN's been a much better fit and certainly got us a lot of exposure. And guys like Delano Taylor, who's got a bright future as a young athlete with a ton of talent and right on down the line. Brendan Loughnane, excited to see him, especially with the UK office opening and doing shows in the UK. Dakota, the young female that we signed in the 145-pound class, has been a blast to watch. Got to see her fight first in Cardiff, Wales, and then on the finals card, she fought great that night as well. Very exciting young female athlete. So a ton of great athletes, and all about being themselves, setting their goals, putting themselves out there, and accomplishing those goals with a shot at a title every year and $1 million. It doesn't get much better than that.
Another interesting signing that the PFL has made in recent weeks is obviously Jake Paul getting ready to make his professional MMA debut later this year, and brings a lot of attention to the sport from his YouTube background. I guess, what are your thoughts on him getting ready to make his MMA debut and his presence in the PFL?
I suspect, just like they did with Kayla Harrison and just like they've done with Clarissa Shields, they're going to give him some time to get his feet under him, to learn and adjust and adapt and transition to being a bona fide MMA fighter. Obviously, we know his boxing skills are on point, but can he stop a takedown? What's he going to do when he hits his back? Because at some point he's going to hit his back. So where he chooses to train, who he chooses to train with, and how he commits himself and immerses himself in the MMA world is the real question there. Get him in some fights that he should be in, because in a lot of ways, he's still 0-0 in MMA. So put him in the right fights. Let him get his feet under him. And then once he feels comfortable there, I think we got to throw him in the field. You know, that's what we do. It's a meritocracy. All that talk and all that rhetoric isn't going to get you anywhere unless you're able to get in that cage and fight. So at the end of the day, push is going to come to shove, and he's going to have to step in that cage and fight.
As somebody that's worked with a lot of males and females in the sport, that's been around the sport for as long as you have, I mean, just kind of talk to me, I guess, what kind of opponent would you look at for Jake Paul's first MMA fight? Are you looking at, like a bigger name like Anthony Pettis, or are you looking at somebody with, a similar experience level? I guess, what do you do in that situation?
Well, first of all, Anthony Pettis is a different weight class than Jake Paul would be, I'm assuming. I think Jake could probably make 170. But he's not a small guy. So what weight class is he going to compete at? We don't have a 185-pound class, at least at this stage in the PFL. So he's got to be a 205 or 170. That's going to be interesting. You get him in with one of these name fighters, but not a marquee fighter. Anthony Pettis is a marquee fighter. I mean, he's got a ton of experience. That's a bad choice, honestly. For an early guy trying to make that transition from boxing to MMA. So I think that's an important decision. Get him in the right fight. To test his skills, I mean, look at the 2 fights that Clarissa Shields has had with the PFL. They got her in the right fights. It was still a challenge. There were no guarantees there, and she ended up losing one of those fights. So I think that Jake's going to have to experience that same thing. Give him the chance to get his feet under him, but at some point, like I said, push is going to come to shove. You're going to have to fight some real guys.
Few more questions for me. Once again, I really do appreciate the time. I know you guys have a lot going on this week. Francis Ngannou, obviously the biggest news headline in the sport right now, splitting from the UFC, I guess. What was your immediate reaction when you found out the news?
Well, I mean, we've heard a few athletes at that level, those marquee guys, that top 3 to 5% of the sport, that are chirping about fighter pay and the lack of transparency, certainly with the UFC. Something I've been chirping about for quite some time. With little or no backing or anybody else that agreed with my stance on the ancillary rights and all the other stuff that are in these contracts. Francis stood up for himself. Obviously he trains at my gym, but I had no conversation with him. I certainly talked to Eric, who's our head coach and Francis's coach, about the situation and how I saw it. I'm glad he stuck to his guns. I think the UFC stepped up in the amount of money that they were willing to give him to get him to re-sign a contract. And I think the other things that Francis asked for weren't out of the question. They were reasonable things that any other athlete in any other sport in our society would be getting. But the fact that the UFC wasn't willing to meet him there, and Francis stood up for himself, so they dropped him. It's pretty cut and dry. So we'll see. I'm hoping that the PFL jumps all over Francis and signs him. He'd be a great addition to the heavyweight division. I would pay to see him and Ante Delia, or any of these heavyweights that we have in the PFL fight with Francis. Those would be great fights. The Problema comes to mind. I mean, that guy's huge. It'd be a really interesting fight between him and Francis. But we'll see what happens. I know he has some aspirations in boxing as well. Is Tyson Fury a good idea? I would think that Francis needs to really get his feet under him in the boxing world before he tries to take on a Tyson Fury. Francis has got that kind of power that's always going to be a problem for anybody he faces, but they're talking about a lot of boxing experience in Tyson Fury. So we'll see how it unfolds. I hope we get him in the PFL.
Absolutely. And a follow up on that too. Yours and Francis's situations with the UFC were similar but different in a way, right? So I guess my question for you is: were there any conversations with Francis in terms of seeking advice on how to handle those negotiations or anything like that? I guess what can you tell us about that?
I mean, I didn't have any input there other than the talks I had with Eric. Eric Nixick is our head coach. He's the one that's directly related and coaches Francis and helps Francis certainly on the technical side. I'm not sure exactly who manages Francis, honestly, and I never talked to his management. His management would be the people that would be negotiating for him with Dana White and Zuffa, or WME, who owns the brand now. So I never spoke to them. I don't even know who that is. So any input I had was my dealings with the Dana and the company back in the day, and that was never directly with Francis. That was just with Eric. So I mean, that's the extent of it as far as I'm concerned. I was happy that he was standing up for himself and doing what he felt like he needed to do to get a fair shake and get his piece, in the marketplace for what he's brought to the table for the UFC in the heavyweight division.
No doubt about it. And we'll definitely keep an eye on if the PFL signs him, man. That would be obviously an awesome addition to the PFL. Last question for me. Got to get back to the PFL. Give us a couple of names to watch for in the PFL Challenger Series. Maybe some names that you've looked at, that you've had your eye on, that maybe fans may be overlooking. Who are a couple of fighters that we should really be watching for as the Challenger Series launches in 2023?
Yeah, well, so many of these fighters are a mystery to me at this point. Until we get to dig in and I get to see them fight, it's hard for me to earmark, you got to watch out for this guy, because frankly, there's a lot of them there that are unknown. I don't know them either. So I'm excited to see them, because last year is any indication the Challenger Series is real. These are some very, very good. Delano Taylor coming out of that, Carlos Leal coming out of that, some of our Montez, some of our female fighters coming out of that Challenger Series were real athletes that had an impact on last year's regular season as well. And I suspect the field that they put together this year for the Challenger Series is going to be no different. There's some legit fighters in there. It's going to be fun to watch.
Absolutely. Well, Randy, it was great to meet you. Great to chat with you. Before we wrap things up here, I'll give you the floor to give any shout outs to any sponsors you're working with, the PFL, anything like that. I'll give you the final word.
Well, I hope everybody's tuning in this Friday for the Challenger Series. We have 8 of those Challenger Series fights coming up. I'll be a celebrity guest judge to determine who potentially gets a contract in 3 of those shows. I'm looking forward to being in Orlando at the ESPN studios and seeing the Challenger Series for 2023 unfold. Obviously heavily involved with charity for our veterans and those guys that are wounded and transitioning back to civilian life with the Extreme Couture GI Foundation and MVP Emerging Vets and Players. Got 9 chapters. Any of you vets out there, find us, xcgif.org and vetsandplayers.org. Love to have you join us.
Love it. Well, Randy, I appreciate the chat. It was great to meet you. Great to chat with you, and all the best this week and beyond. And I'm sure we'll chat again soon, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.